It's Ahmad Sadiq from Land Trust Title of Central Florida. Let's talk title. Today I want to talk about something that we deal with on a regular basis on a lot of the transactions that are coming through our door. And that is whether or not an open or an expired permit is something that needs to be taken care of in order for a transaction to close. Now, as part of our general title process, we have to do a lot of different things here at the title company. We're going to do our title search, we're going to get an estoppel from the HOA, and we're going to get a municipal lien search as well. Now, the municipal lien search is going to give us a lot of very important information. It's going to let us know whether there's any issues related to property taxes in the most recent year or in the previous decade. It's going to give us information about whether there's any code violations that exist that haven't yet become liens on property. And it's also going to give us information about utility payments and outstanding utility payments that may be from the current homeowner or previous homeowner as well. However, it's also going to give us information about open or expired permits. And these open or expired permits are going to detail any permits that have existed essentially since the property was built. And ultimately, we run into roadblocks in a lot of transactions where we have sellers that are either unwilling or unable to close out any open or expired permits. And the question then becomes, do we have to take care of these things in order to close the transaction? For us at the title company, our job is ultimately to make sure that title is clear so that when the property is conveyed over to the buyer, there's no title defects that are associated with the property. Having said that, open or expired permits are technically not title defects that are associated with the property, and in a lot of instances won't become title defects that are associated with the property. The real estate contract, the as-is Florida Bar real estate contract, tells us a lot of important information as it relates to permits. It tells us that sellers are required to provide any information needed to the buyer in order to find out costs associated with closing open or expired permits. The seller is required to give any information that they have that's going to help the buyer deal with any open or expired permits, but it does specifically say that the assistance that the seller has to give does not include having to expend any resources or any financial resources in order to help close those open or expired permits out. What we've been seeing a lot more recently is savvy buyer's agents will put additional language in the additional remarks of the real estate contract to say something specifically that deals with open or expired permits. The language can say something along the lines of, seller will be responsible for closing out any open or expired permits prior to closing taking place. And what does that do? Ultimately, what that takes the onus of clearing these issues related to any potential permits and puts it on the seller, and ultimately gives the buyer an out to move out of the contract and to cancel the contract if the seller is unwilling or unable to close those permits out. Because without that language, technically, when we're looking at the real estate contract, the seller doesn't have to do anything above providing information and making it easy for the buyer to deal with those issues. The buyer then can ultimately close the transaction knowing that that information is there. Our job at the title company is to make sure that the buyer and seller are aware of any defects associated with the property, whether or not they're title defects, so that the buyer is at least aware of any issues that might arise with the property in the future, and then close on that transaction knowing that information. Because our job is not only to clear title defects, our job is also to provide as much information to both the seller and the buyer as possible so that the buyer is not surprised with any issues down the road. So ultimately, open or expired permits are not title defects that are associated with the property. However, it can impact the closing, and savvy buyer's agents are putting additional language in the additional remarks of the contract to make sure that the sellers are responsible for taking care of those things before the closing happens. Guys, again, thank you so much for your time. Look forward to seeing you next time.